I'd like to thank everybody for coming and welcome everybody to this event. We also would like to thank the volunteers who helped out from the Worcester Tea Party, Boston Tea Party, and Pete's family. I really don't think that there's much you can say, because if anybody has followed him, you're going to know who he is. So I would say, meet Stacy and McCain.
Right. Thank you, and thanks to the Worcester Tea Party, the guys from Granite Grok, and my good friend Pete, the tech guy in the back with the fedora. My book is Sex Trouble, Radical Feminism and the War Against Human Nature. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but today, just the news has come from Paris that the famous feminist Kate Millett is dead. So she is now a good feminist, and that's terrible. Anyways, I make these bad jokes. But the question before us, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get my glasses here as I become elderly. What is feminism? What does this word mean? Okay, hang on a second. Okay, hang on just a second. Aha.
Okay. Oh, we just say.
What do feminists believe? These are important questions Americans need to ask in an age defined by identity politics. Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign made feminism a central issue and inspired her followers to believe that she could be elected as our first female president. Alas, it was not to be. The election of Donald Trump inspired tears among Hillary's feminist supporters, but that soon turned to rage. And we saw angry feminists take to the streets to protest the inauguration of Donald Trump. It's easy to laugh at these women, but 66 million people voted for Hillary Clinton. We have to take feminism seriously. We have to ask, what is feminism? And I can answer this in one sentence. Feminism is a totalitarian movement to destroy civilization as we know it. That may sound crazy, but I can prove it. For more than 3 years, I've been researching radical feminism. This photo shows just one shelf from my home library, which includes more than 100 feminist titles, ranging from the obscure to the famous, including popular recent titles, women's studies textbooks, and rare treatises dating back to the very beginning of the modern feminist movement. All of this can be summarized by what I call McCain's law of feminism. There are 3 kinds of feminism. Feminism that is wrong, feminism that is crazy, and feminism that is both wrong and crazy. All joking aside, however, if we want to understand feminism, it's important to study the movement's history. The modern feminist movement can be traced back to the 1960s. What is now called second wave feminism originated with a fairly small group of women associated with the radical New Left particularly the Students for a Democratic Society, also known as SDS. Now, you may know that the SDS later turned into the Weather Underground. One of the key founders of the women's liberation movement was Shulamith Firestone, who in 1968 used a mailing list of SDS women to organize the first radical feminist groups in New York and Washington. The very first public protest staged by the women's liberation movement in September 1968 was against the Miss America pageant. Notice the use of extreme rhetoric, the claim that women are forced to play certain roles, forced to compete for male approval. Women are enslaved, psychologically conditioned, and oppressed in low-status roles. All of this forcible slavery and oppression, feminists claim, was symbolized by a simple beauty pageant. Somehow it is wrong for men to admire women's beauty, and also wrong for women to enjoy male admiration. This shows how radical ideology turns entirely normal human behavior into evidence of oppression. Shulamith Firestone and several other radical women involved in the protest against Miss America formed a feminist collective known as Red Stockings. Their 1968 manifesto is considered a founding document of the modern feminist movement and is required reading in many women's studies programs. Notice the insistence that all women are victims of total oppression and that all men have oppressed women. Firestone's 1970 book, The Dialectic of Sex, reflected the Marxist influence on feminist ideology. She condemned the biological family as a source of tyranny and advocated the elimination of all of the sex distinction itself, end quote. Whatever happened to Shulamith Firestone? She was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. For decades, she lived on public assistance. She died alone at age 67 in a tiny apartment in August 2012. By the time they found her body, she had been dead for a week. Another early radical women's liberation group, led by Ty Grace Atkinson, called themselves simply the Feminists. In their manifesto, they described men as enemies and oppressors of women and vowed to destroy sex roles, which they claimed are the product of a political class separation. Again, this shows the influence of Marxism on feminist ideology. It was in a 1968 interview with Life magazine that Ty Grace Atkinson declared, "Marriage means rape and lifelong slavery," end quote. One of her comrades, Sheila Cronin, elaborated on this claim by saying that the cruelty of marriage is demonstrated by, quote, "the fact that it appears to exist with the consent of the enslaved group," end quote. Now, we see how feminist ideology is based in claims of oppression. Men are the enemy, marriage is slavery, and the family is tyranny. Where does this rhetoric logically lead? By 1970, a group of lesbians calling themselves the Lavender Menace took over a national feminist conference in New York and issued a manifesto denouncing heterosexuality as an institution of male supremacy. Inspired by this feminist manifesto, a left-wing activist named Charlotte Bunch divorced her husband and started a lesbian collective in Washington, D.C. that became known as the Furies. She issued her own manifesto entitled Lesbians in Revolt, condemning heterosexuality as inherently degrading to women, a humiliating submission to personal oppression. One of the co-founders of Charlotte Bunch's Furies collectives was Jenny Burson. Despite attending prestigious Mount Holyoke College, Jenny Burson saw herself as an oppressed victim of male supremacy. Burson subsequently became a powerful executive in the field of public radio broadcasting. Another associate of the Furies collective was Margaret Small, who helped create one of the first college women's studies courses in the country. After reading her 1975 declaration that heterosexuality is the ideology of male supremacy, end quote, I got wondering, whatever happened to Margaret Small? And I was startled to discover that she was working as a math teacher for a North Carolina public school system. Shortly after I reported that startling fact, Margaret Small announced her retirement. Probably just a coincidence. But whatever happened to Charlotte Bunch, you may ask? She is now Professor Charlotte Bunch, a distinguished faculty member at Rutgers University. How distinguished is she? Let's watch a little video tribute from one of Professor Bunch's influential friends.
And they are part of a powerful new current of grassroots activism. Someone who has been leading the charge and making this case for a long time is Charlotte Bunch. She has always been on the front line of this struggle.
On the front line
as
of
an
the
activist and an organizer, a writer and a teacher, a champion for our common humanity.
For the children.
I got to know her in the run-up to the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing back in 1995. I saw her as an extraordinary leader and advocate, immersed in the workings of international law and understanding the almost incomprehensible UN process. Because she knew that to weave the rights and concerns of women into the fabric of the international community, the world needed to come together. The historic outcomes of Beijing would not have been possible without her tireless work and her brilliant vision.
Her brilliant vision.
She didn't stop there, though. She founded the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers, which provided an intellectual and organizing foundation for work around the world, especially in the fight against sexual and gender-based violence. She also led the gender equality architecture reform effort that laid the groundwork for the creation of UN Women, a major step forward in the international system. She has been a tireless advocate for the UN Convention on the elimination of all discrimination against women, and let me say again, it is way past time for the United States to demonstrate our global leadership by finally ratifying the convention. A year after Beijing, I was very proud to stand and see my husband honor Charlotte as a leader with the Eleanor Roosevelt Award for Human Rights in 1996. And when I became Secretary of State, She was one of a small group of women leaders I brought together to help steer a new course for American diplomacy and to ensure that the needs and concerns of women and girls were integrated into all aspects of our foreign policy. So I am grateful for Charlotte's leadership.
For leadership.
I'm really impressed by all of her contributions, and I'm also challenged by her absolute demand that we keep doing more and more, that no matter what we've done, we can't be satisfied.
We can't be satisfied.
So I think we should all work to be worthy of Charlotte's example, to keep fighting for rights and opportunities, to keep pushing for participation, to keep telling the world that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all. Now join me in learning more about Charlotte Bunch and her extraordinary work.
Her extraordinary work. Yes, so you have just seen a 2013 gala in New York that was reported by all the media who somehow didn't report who Charlotte Bunch actually is. You see that Charlotte Bunch became an important figure in the feminist movement, an author and editor of such works as Building Feminist Theory, which included her argument that destroying male supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism required feminists to attack heterosexuality as the cornerstone of male supremacy. Hillary Clinton praised Charlotte Bunch as an extraordinary leader. Hillary chose Professor Bunch to be part of a small group of women to direct the State Department's feminist agenda. Have I got your attention now? Feminism is an official government ideology taught to university students at taxpayer expense. What I call the feminist industrial complex of women's and gender studies programs employ thousands of professors teaching tens of thousands of students every year. And what is feminism? Folks, you're not paying attention. Feminism is a totalitarian movement to destroy civilization as we know it, and I've got the quotes to prove it. Andrea Dworkin declared that heterosexual behavior is a betrayal of our common humanity. Therefore, feminists must destroy role definitions of male and female. Feminists must destroy the family. Feminists must destroy the structure of culture as we know it. Sound familiar? Michigan State University professor Marilyn Frye made this statement in a 1980 speech to the National Women's Studies Association. I think that widespread heterosexuality among women is a highly artificial product of the patriarchy. I think that most women have to be coerced into heterosexuality. Professor Frye has retired, but her claim that heterosexuality is artificial, socially constructed by patriarchy, is now a basic premise of feminist gender theory as taught on college and university campuses everywhere. University of Colorado professor Allison Jagger was highly influential in the field of women's studies. A self-described socialist feminist, Professor Jagger was co-editor of a women's studies textbook, Feminist Frameworks, which went through 3 editions between 1978 and 1993. The first condition for escaping from forced motherhood and sexual slavery is escape from the patriarchal institution of marriage. And a tenured professorship probably helps too. Professor Catherine McKinnon is arguably one of the most important feminist intellectuals of all time. She wrote a pioneering book about sexual harassment, and her 1989 book, Toward a Feminist Theory of the State, is a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the feminist worldview. Professor McCain openly acknowledges... That's just a ding on my computer. Hang on a second. Thank you, computer, for alerting me that I had a Facebook message. Technology is wonderful, isn't it?
Haven't kicked you off.
Her book is a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the feminist worldview. Professor McCain openly acknowledges how feminism is really just a variation on Marxism. Her description of heterosexuality as a structure for the organized expropriation of women's sexuality is simply a way for Professor McCain to say that heterosexuality is intrinsically wrong. Cheshire Calhoun is a professor at Arizona State University. She is editor of the Oxford University Press series, Studies in Feminist Philosophy. This is quoted from an article that was included in a women's anthology study called Feminist Theory Reader, an assigned textbook in many university courses where students are taught that heterosexuality is a system of male ownership of women. Notice how University of Cincinnati professor D. Graham put quote marks around the word normal here. Intercourse is an act of male sexual violence, according to Professor Graham. Heterosexuality is all about male power and dominance, which are essential to patriarchy. Notice that, by the way, notice I keep saying professor, professor, professor. These aren't just random cranks, putting out mimeographs somewhere. These are leading academics. Professor Diane Richardson of England's Newcastle University assures us that it is widely accepted within feminism that heterosexuality is a key site of male power. This isn't about your individual preferences, but is a socially constructed institution which maintains male dominance. Notice also how, by the 21st century, Professor Richardson could just take it for granted that her feminist readers reject marriage and motherhood as institutions of slavery and oppression. Well, what do students learn from their women's studies professor? This quote about heterosexuality as the structure of sexist oppression is from a student at Portland State University. The student posted this online as part of her coursework for an introductory feminist theory class in 2007 called Gender and Critical Inquiry. You see how ideas that strike most people as extreme are now considered mainstream in academic feminism. Professor Shaw and Professor Lee, both of whom teach at Oregon State, in their textbook, Women's Voices, Feminist Visions, is widely assigned in introductory women's studies classes. Every college student is now expected to think of heterosexuality in terms of male power and women's subservience. So here's a bonus question for your final exam. What is feminism? Feminism is a totalitarian movement to destroy civilization as we know it. Pay attention, kids, this is going to be on the test. Once young women are trained in this ideology, they leave college as activists and spread feminism everywhere. Rachel Ivey is a member of the radical environmental group Deep Green Resistance. And this is a quote from her 2013 presentation, The End of Gender, which has gotten more than 60,000 views on YouTube. Her claim that gender is about the subordination of females through force amounts to an assertion that there are no natural differences between men and women, except, of course, that men are oppressors who get the blame for this hierarchical system of power. Here is a 2015 book entitled The Crisis of Campus Sexual Violence, which suggests that this crisis can only be solved by eliminating both heterosexuality and masculinity. And this, I would argue, is exactly the goal of campus feminism. Here is a Harvard University student, Nhan Hu. Her name is Nhan Hu. She's a Harvard University student and a columnist for the Harvard Crimson. Last spring, denouncing male allies of the feminist movement, telling them that their support is not welcome. They will always be oppressors. Feminism does not need men. Smash patriarchy. Is this just a slogan? Feminists declare war against a system, but what about actual human beings? Isn't it likely that real people will suffer real harm from all this smashing? But feminism is now mainstream. We have seen celebrities like Beyonce Knowles endorse feminism. This was at the 2014 Video Music Awards. We saw Madonna speak at the Women's March on Washington. And yet, feminism continues destroying lives. On university campuses, women claim that they are living in a rape culture, and the Obama administration imposed policies that deprive students of due process rights. More than 100 lawsuits have been filed by students who say they were wrongly accused of sexual assault. Radical gender theory is being imposed on children. We see this celebrated in the media and even in elementary schools. People are afraid to speak out against this. When a California kindergarten teacher taught a lesson about transgenderism for 5-year-olds, parents were angry, but they didn't want to show their faces on TV because they feared reprisal. Free speech rights are under attack. Teen Vogue magazine publishes an article promoting anal sex, and a mother is banned from YouTube for objecting to this. Another woman, Jennifer Morse, who I read frequently, Jennifer Morse was labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center because she quoted the Vatican's policy about homosexuality.
Disagreement is now being redefined as hate. Feminists want to silence their opposition.
But who is really the hate group here? Tens of millions of innocent lives have been destroyed by the abortion industry since the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision. Feminists applaud this destruction. Feminism has become a death cult, and they want to impose this cult ideology on everyone. Well, what is feminism? Feminism is a totalitarian movement to destroy civilization as we know it, and it's time for people to wake up before it's too late. Thank you very much.
Crop time.